You preparing Zoom to Facebook, setting up your meeting for Facebook Live. Okay. Meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. Okay, so we are live. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Well, this is the Shameless Pleasure Movement presenting Liana Live. And this is your home for enlightened conversations and stories, and for the transmission of wisdom around sexuality, intimacy, and relationships. And we're all about transforming the energy of shame and fear to love and pleasure around sexuality. So I am your host, Liana, and if you don't know about me, I'm a sex and relationship coach and healer, and I guide singles and couples to create dynamic and pleasurable, intimate and sexual lives. So today I have a dynamic couple, friends of mine from Vancouver, BC, Canada. Yes. Hello. I am coming I'm coming from Rio de Janeiro. And so here in Vancouver, I have Jenna and Trevor Warren. They are a fabulous dynamic couple. Trevor is a therapist. He's been for many years working with people in relationships and sexuality and intimacy. And Jenna is nonviolent communication trainer. And together they've created this new company called Fierce Loving. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to bring them on today so we could talk about thriving in a relationship, exploring a relationship, growing in a relationship. These guys have since I've known them, they have been doing some extraordinary work and just growing and blossoming over the years. It's been amazing, I guess, and it's been tough and it's been everything. So we're going to hear some more about it. So why don't we first, let me make sure I say I'm live.
Yeah, I see it. It says live.
Yeah, it says live on Facebook, but I don't see myself on Facebook. So I'm not sure why I don't. So we're just going to keep going because I don't know that. Yeah, so why don't you guys say a little bit about yourself? We'll start with that, and then we'll get into some questions about what's going on around intimacy and sexuality with couples.
Yay.
Hi.
This is the point I get, hi, I don't know anything about myself.
Who am I?
What would you like to know? Like just kind of background? Like
yeah, a little bit about, I think a little bit of background, but then get into this Fierce Loving, because this is the new thing that two of you have started together, and that's been based on your own relationship and developing that, and then growing into this company where you're helping people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, so you already mentioned, so I've been a therapist for, I think 27 years now.
Mm-hmm. Whoa.
In the last 20, I think it's because maybe my dad was in and out of a number of relationships and, just watched relationships come and go. And I thought like, well, how do you make things work? And so my work and my passion, my personal interest has mostly for the last 2 decades revolved around couples. And I would say probably the last 10 specifically around couples and sexuality, because that topic just, as I'm sure, it doesn't get talked about very much. Your title about shame, shame and how that really keeps the conversation underground. So I've been pretty excited and enthusiastic and activistic, I suppose you could say, about getting that front and center, because it's such a primary language of connection, touch and sensuality and sexuality. So that's been my passion. And then, so I met this woman 5 years ago. And,
yes.
And we've had quite a journey. Fierce Loving, I think, there's been iterations of our work together, but Fierce Loving is the most recent one over the last couple of years. And it's kind of, it's about mastering intimacy, depth and intimacy. And with a clear inclusion of sexuality, again, because that's not the topic that gets talked about very much. And so we have in the past, before COVID got a hold of us, done some really lovely events around sensual touch, communication and intimacy, and we're kind of excited to do more of that when the space opens up again, because we were
Yeah.
actually we were supposed to be at a couple tantra festivals this summer, which have been canceled, to do a lot of our touch work, and so it's tricky. It's been tricky stuff to translate into video stuff because it's so much about touch. So that's kind of what Fierce Loving, I think, is up to right now.
Yeah, it's I think in lots of ways it's in the similar state many of us are in, which is a redefinition and reassessment of like, where does that really want to go and where does it want to be birthed into next. And certainly we had intended to be away at some personal development things this April that was going to really fuel its next iteration. And, you know, it's happening anyways, just in ways we didn't expect. So, and that's often how relationships work. It would be like this. Yeah.
Right. So you're going to go to some actual live events, but other things have come up that have taken the place of that.
Yeah.
Whoa. Sweet.
Well, lots of time together, you know, and I mean, everyone's spending more time at home and more time in their partnerships and friendships, and well, not friendships, but family ships, you know, the places where we are, or alone, because sometimes that's people's situation as well. So yeah, lots of things have happened in the last couple months.
Yes. Well, it's, I know that some of these big festivals and groups have decided just to move everything online, even though this is sexuality or sensuality, intimacy. They've decided, let's just try and see what happens if we put it online. And have you been able to attend anything that's been going on, and what was your experience with that?
Yeah, the International School of Temple Arts is where we've been doing our development and training in the last couple of years, ISTA. And they held a Tantra Festival at the beginning of May. And we were actually going to be at the physical festival in Phoenix in middle of April. And that did not happen. And so it went online, and it became a completely different experience and a different organism. It would have been 500 people, you know, localized in Phoenix, but instead it was 1,500 people dispersed all around the world, having this incredible connection around depth and such. And I was amazed at what they had capacity to create over, you know, the internet. We did one of the workshops we did was a couples tantric date that was facilitated a 3-hour journey, and there was 133 couples in the class, so on Zoom basically. It was incredible. The amount of love, and I love the delocalization that it's happening like universally around the world instead of only where we can travel to. From our creating this energy.
It was my first time attending that as well, and that's because it was online. It was accessible to me because I'm in Brazil and I hadn't planned to go anywhere, and I didn't realize it had exploded from 500 to 1,500 online. That's massive. Wow.
70% of the participants were brand new to ISTA, which means that people, like you said, got access to something that they might have been curious about or wouldn't have had the opportunity to go in person because it was then very affordable. You didn't have to pay for airfare and the expensive 1-week retreat and all that. So yeah, that in itself made it more accessible.
Yeah, well, they're you know, just being on that, going to that event myself, and then from there was information about other events coming up. I thought, wow, like there's so much pleasure out there. Everybody's just saying, okay, we can't have our pleasure events or our festivals or conferences in live. We're gonna do it anyways. We're gonna flow this pleasure through. And if there was so many more people coming, that just spreads the word, you know, even more. It's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Force of love and pleasure.
Non-stop.
Horrible things happen, and so we need to let it flow.
So with Fierce Loving, what kind of inspired you and drove you to really focus on couples, you know, is through maybe something through your own experience, or what was the driving force around bringing this about in your life?
I mean, there was a couple iterations before Fierce Loving formed in its current iteration. We both are support people, and we both facilitate and do different kinds of guiding people through their journeys. And lots around communication. And so we played with that as workshops we wanted to do. But then we realized what we both get most excited about is intimacy, and how do we create spaces for people to be their most authentic selves and their most fully expressed selves, and in deep partnership, because sometimes our individualization separates us from intimacy. And so how can we bring those together and be sovereign and synergistic together? So we knew that the just doing communication for the masses wasn't going to be enough. We wanted to focus in on what are the skills and what's the consciousness and awareness that's needed to cultivate deep partnership. Yeah.
And there's lots out there on communication. There's not that much out there on sexuality and deep intimacy and sensuality. You know, it's more of a top. Yeah, it just doesn't get as much airtime. So I think that's part of what. And being a therapist, couples therapist, you know, I probably have a skewed population that I work with of trouble, but those folks and just the average population relative to, I think, what we were experiencing about the depth of intimacy we were cultivating, I thought, wow, there's a huge gap, so much room for people to grow around understand intimacy. So, and we want, you know, some of what we're experiencing for everybody else too. So it's like we were constantly asked this question, how do we get this across to people? How do we get it? You know, we do a ton of work. We're, you know, personal workshop junkies, really, just like we'd swamp. But I just want people to feel more pleasure and power and, like, you know, just connection. So I think, and for us, I'll like, don't speak for us, is that sexuality is such a center point for our own personal power, for depth of connection, for sacred connection, that we must open that up and unpack that and find ways to go deeper. And that's our tagline at Fierce Loving. It's Fierce Loving, go deeper, right? That's what we want to encourage people to do. So, and it's, you know, it's free. It's pleasurable. It's like, we need to get on it.
It's there, it's available, you have access to it, you know, it's part of you, it's part of the relationship. So I mean, what do you see? I mean, you've been working with couples for a long time. What has been the struggle for most couples wanting to dive into exploring deeper around sexuality?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, the backstory on it is like 10 years ago that I've been a couples therapist for 20 years, and I realized I hadn't been talking about sex with my clients. Well,
right.
That's strange because the way I feel most deeply connected to my partner is I love talking. I'm a talker. I'm all that stuff, but it's in the depth of intimate sexual union that I feel most connected. So, I lost my train of thought.
That's amazing.
Talking about the couples and transforming sexuality.
It's a very difficult conversation for the average person to have. So
yeah,
what I do is like just starting to get them comfortable. Like, much of the session is just about normalizing sexuality and like helping them kind of emancipate from the repressed shame that's really we're under a lot of layers of. And my observation, at least of the couples that I work with, is often sex is stopped. There's a lot of sexless marriages out there. You know, I say there's two languages of connection. One is really deep, intimate, vulnerable communication, open-hearted communication. And the other one is touch, you know, it's touch and sexuality and sensuality. And these are like these paths of connection. And so when couples come to me, they're disconnected. That's bottom line, is they don't feel connection, and because they're missing these two arteries. And so I usually work with talk first because people are more comfortable with that. And if they want to stay on a little longer, we start talking about sexuality. And because most people, what they think is good sex is, like, in my estimation, like a 2 out of 10 compared to what it can be.
Possible.
especially when you introduce sacred realms and just, you know, and the energy, like, which most people really don't know about. So
Right.
there's tons of room for that conversation to evolve. So for anybody who wants to, you know, get in there with me, and then I'm happy to just kind of like help them expand those pieces to feel connected, because that's what we want.
Yeah, yeah. And you talked about the shame around, you know, maybe even just and not, you know, all, no, the shame, but not knowing that there's these other possibilities to explore within your own sexual life. You know, if you don't know, how are you even supposed to take the steps? You
Yeah.
just think maybe, and there's so many preconceived old beliefs about what the relationship and sexuality are supposed to be. And you know, this idea that as your relationship continues, sex is going to get worse, and don't worry about it, that's just the way it is, honey, you know. Because nobody has that information.
Or that
That
sex over 50, nada, it's all going to
sex over
decline. It's going to go away. Never mind. We're both
yeah.
over 50. I can attest that is not true.
There we go. See?
There you
Well,
go.
exactly. And it's breaking those beliefs, breaking those really old, strong, uh,
Deep
archaic ideas, right?
conditioning, deep conditioning
And
in
did
in
you, yeah, go ahead, please.
in who we are and who the masculine is, and what the deep conditioning is around the men and masculine and how they show up, and deep conditioning for women and how we are, and what is it to be feminine, what is it to be a woman, and conditioning around that. And then in the space in between about relationships, there's like one model we're all supposed to aspire to, and that's upheld, and anything else is a failure, which is, it just sets us all up to feel like this is a huge struggle. And instead of
Yeah.
everything being learning, instead of everything being in a curiosity or an exploration or an adventure, or, you know, instead of it just being growth, it's like either we're failing or, you know, we're doing that one thing that's right. So
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's why a lot of people get really stuck, because they're stuck in that old box. Let's say a box that's, you know, heterosexual, monogamous, long term, happy. That's your life. That is your sex life. Go enjoy it. But really, there's so much more. As soon as you are able to deconstruct that box, it is scary. And I think that's what I
very
find with a lot of people. It's like, whoa. How do you
terrifying.
how do you deal with people that are in that kind of situation where it's like, yeah, we want to go beyond this, but what do we do? And maybe even through your own experience, because I know you guys were, um, as you were exploring and growing, you were incorporating it into your work as well. And so how was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, all of these journeys, even as a couple, this is my own journey. Like, there's a piece of sovereignty, there's a piece of like knowing myself and being responsible for myself and my pleasure and my sexuality and my voice. All of that is work that I have had to do on my own, sometimes in relationship, sometimes not in relationship, that I have just been really committed to in my life, about being to
Mm-hmm.
find my voice and just to be able to say scary things, to be able to hear scary things from my partner, to be able to be really honest and to be kind while I'm honest, to be compassionate to myself when I'm struggling with something, to be able to heal traumas that I experienced in my youth, you know, in my younger years, to be able to move through pain, to be able to become embodied again, to be able to own my body and what pleasure is for me. So a lot of this work is work we think we're in a couple, so we have to do it here. And that is absolutely true. And a lot of it happens here and over there, separate. And then we bring it together. We see each other because we know each other better. We know ourselves better. We can know each other better. So
Right, right.
yeah.
I would say too, you know, I would say 12 or 13 years ago, I was cramped up around sexuality. It, like I said, I wasn't even talking to my clients about it. And for me, gentle exposure over time, I think, is what really helps people realize that, you know, it feels scary, it looks scary. What if I do this? And but I think as we like find what that edge is for us and lean just beyond it, so that we, especially around sexuality, because it's such a, there's so much trauma in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be really careful and gentle, but a slow movement, slow exercise. We actually have this term we call the slow opening. Has to do
Mm-hmm. That's nice.
when we met.
Slow down.
Yeah.
Most everything's better when it's slower. Making
Oh,
love.
yes. That should be
So,
the main tagline. Slow down.
yeah. So,
Oh, that's lovely. Slow opening. So tell me about that. What are you doing with that?
well, we're just kind of working with it. I mean, we've been
I
on
like it.
process ourselves of the slow opening. I mean, when we met, we both said to each other explicitly that we at some point wanted an open relationship.
Yeah.
But we just fell into natural monogamy for the first couple of years, developing security attachment. We didn't have anything, no desire to kind of go out there. And then eventually it started to come up and we're like, how do we do this? And I had been in previous relationships in the lifestyle and different things like that, but Jenna had not been in a partnership that was open. So, and we have such this deep connection. It's like forging out into these, people would say you're playing with fire, but it's like, so we'd be worried about the connection. So we just go super slow. And with every movement we make, and then that's where the good communication comes in. And is everything okay? And then we learn to say scary things to each other, and
what we really wanted.
Go as slow as you can so nobody gets traumatized. I mean, it's bound to run into, and we have run into some bumps for sure. We're bound to have moments of fear and question and
make mistakes.
Yeah.
You kind of just have to be willing if you're going to embark in these places of like deep authenticity. Like what is my truth? Not just the truth I think I'm allowed to have in a partnership. What's the truth that's mine? And can I say that? And I risk saying that. You have to be willing for people to stub their toe and to misstep, because it's going to happen. We're humans. We're figuring it out. And so there's a lot of grace involved in giving each other leniency to make mistakes and to come back to the really good intentions, to have care for each other, and to have integrity and radical transparency.
Radical transparency. Yes, that's a tough one. Getting to that point of being radically, transparent with yourself to start. Like you say, you have to start with yourself, right? You have to do this work here, because when you come together with the couple, as a couple, it becomes more complex. Now you're dealing with a completely different individual who has to also have worked on themselves so that you come together stronger and able to then deal with this relationship thing. And you're talking about, okay, so you're wanting to explore, you're a couple, you're wanting to explore and step out of the box a little bit. And you said there's some struggles. What were some of the struggles that you had, that maybe a struggle or a couple of struggles that stand out in your mind that you had to deal with? And yeah.
I had an affair.
Well, that's a big one. Yeah.
It was a huge...
Yeah, and it was in the middle of this slow opening, and we learned tons about, like, this radical transparency piece is a product of that. Learning how to be honest with myself about what my truth was, and like you were saying, there's this box that we're in, and you said knowing yourself first. I think that's so true, because it's even hard for us to be honest about our own desires, because we've been given a small box. So starting there, but there wasn't a part of me that was able to express that. And so I ended up in this situation of going outside of the agreements in our relationship and hiding things, and shadow work came up. There was a whole bunch of stuff I learned about myself. And the big piece that the big lesson that came out of that was, how do we have hard, scary conversations when we're afraid our partner's going to get upset, say when we express a desire, or so this importance of being so radically honest and shameless about our desires is part of the lessons that we took from that. But it was a hard hit. It was a hard
yeah
hit. Yeah, I smile about it now, but there was a long time I didn't smile about that. there. That so it was what are we in? It was 2 years ago. Oh gosh, like
Okay. Well, okay. So
right now.
you've come along. You've come a long way.
2 years ago.
And what about you, Jen? So that's a big
Yeah,
that's
that was
a big
massive.
hit, a big shift, and I totally understand this when someone says, you know, we have it's difficult for us to actually express our desires, know that we're allowed to, know that our partner may there may be able to have some kind of conversation with these things. So you know we're beings that are trying to figure all this stuff out. So now you're faced with this with him who's trying to figure himself out. And so how was that for you?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because you can very much, you know, after the distress of it, and you know, all of that has settled, and it does. If you really work on it, it's not something
Yes.
you get through easily. That's
No, but you don't have to. You can say I'm going to work on this and figure out
yeah.
what's going on.
And rebuild trust, and it redefined my definition of trust. To be honest, it was like trust used to be, here's what you say you're going to do, and you're never going to do anything else. Like you're never going to
Right.
step off the line. This is it. This is, I trust you because you do exactly what you say. And it is important for people to do what they say they're going to do. That is absolutely true, and we're humans, and so we do step off the line. So my expanded definition of trust was, things will happen, and I trust my own inner voice. I trust my capacity to say what's true for me, and I trust my ability to advocate for my needs and to work through challenges. That's my greater expanded sense of trust, instead of it just being, you know, I have trust because he's doing all the right things. Well, he's human, and he's not going to do all the right things all the time, and so I
Yeah.
need trust not to be so fragile. So
Mhm.
I needed to expand it to also include my own capacities to navigate
Mhm.
get difficult. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
look back, I mean, in hindsight is amazing. And I look back and I can see some of the things that even possibly contributed. Um, it was a really scary, I mean, it was super exciting. And I was clear that I wanted non-monogamy, but I didn't really know what that meant. And
Mhm.
in lots of ways, I was just like new discovering things. And so I would get really easily activated at edges that we would be at. My edges were a lot closer than his. He'd already been in a relationship where he'd had non-monogamy experiences. And so my edges, my triggers were much closer. And so I would get easily emotional or upset about things. So being able to manage that myself. And so I think one of the things that might have contributed to him not being able to speak honestly to me is he expressed one of his desires to me, and I was like, well, absolutely not, you know. And I kind of was like, oh no, that's not gonna
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
you know.
So it's like,
And
oh no, oh no.
yeah, and so it brought up stuff for me that I just said no and shut a door in the relationship. I'm like, no, that's not gonna happen. And it probably sent him away going, you know,
What do I do with this?
what do I do with this, that energy that is there for him? And so I didn't leave room for his truth to exist as fully as my truth in that moment. So that's really important. His truth, I didn't necessarily want that in my life, but I needed to make room for conversation. One of my sort of founding principles in relationship, it's the one that I brought into our relationship, is we have to be able to talk about anything. And I mean
Yeah.
absolutely anything. It's we have to be able to discuss it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really
Jeremy was,
important point.
yeah.
That's a really, really important point because a lot of people get triggered in just the discussion. And so that then stops any kind of discussion from happening between the couple. And then one person is like, well, I've got all this I have to deal with. Where do I go? This is my most intimate partner. There's actually been studies done that indicate that as partners stay longer and longer together and are supposedly in a more intimate relationship, their intimacy actually becomes less and less because they tend to protect each other more from the truths that are going on with inside. They don't want to, there's fear of losing their partner, of what their partner is going to say or think of them. And so these fears build and they withhold the true desires because it's going to change as
Totally.
desires change and you need to have that transparency and be able to voice it throughout your life because it will change, especially if you're in a long-term relationship. It will change a number of times. So that's thanks for sharing that. That's a powerful moment for both of you.
The part B of that, which is helpful, is we a place to talk about anything. It doesn't mean we're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a negotiation, right?
Yeah.
But
Just
certainly
talk. Just talk.
that's all we're doing.
Yeah.
We need to have
Yeah.
a platform, like you say it, otherwise it goes into the shadows and then it squirts out sideways and creates damage like it did, in our relationship for that period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to your point, Leanna, that's the thing. I was married for 10 years, and what I noticed towards the end of that relationship is that there was us, there was me, and there was him, and then there was the crossover in the middle of what was possible or what we could conceive of. And I think what you said in the beginning, and then it becomes less and less and less and less like what's possible. So all of this stuff that was me and my expression, there's no room for it anywhere. And so I just felt like less, like I could be a less of myself. And so that's not a relationship that has growth and sustainability and resilience for people to change and grow through life. And so one of the other principles that we've both committed to in our relationship is that I'm really committed to him being being like the most fully expressed human he can be.
Beautiful.
And that even means if he chooses not to be with me.
Right.
So
right.
even if he thinks that thing over there that's his truth and that's his passion and that's what would bring him most alive, that's what I want most for him.
Yeah. That's our principle. Our top principle is to be fully expressed beings.
Yeah. And see, it brings up a little tenderness because it might mean I don't get to keep him, but the keeping him's not the goal. Security isn't the goal for me anymore. It used to be.
Yeah.
And now it's aliveness. How alive can I be?
Yeah.
How much love can I create in the world?
Yeah. And that's moving into compersion, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't want to stay in this relationship. I very much do. And I do a lot of effort for that. But in the end, there's more important things.
Yeah. I completely understand what you're saying. And just to go back a little bit about trust, because this is another aspect similar to what you're just saying around the definition of trust, because I went through that as well myself, redefining what does trust mean. It's like trust is supposed to be, cut in stone. And if you cross that trust barrier, but in similar to what you were saying, that wanting the best for him, I decided to define trust as trusting the person that they know exactly what is best for them.
Yeah.
Right. Trusting your partner that they know what is best for them, even if it's something that has broken a boundary or has gone across the line from what you've decided. It's having enough love and trust in your own partner that they know what they're doing for themselves. And that's important. And that comes back to your desire for them to be a loving person for themselves and for you to be able to support that. And it's not easy to do. We get so wrapped up into the coupledom that we think that this is this one entity, but there's still these two beings that are shifting and changing and growing and experiencing and so
we often will use the term or we talk about trusting each other's process, right?
That's
and
nice.
So we're all going through a process, and it might not look pretty, and it might cause pain and damage, but there's this overarching faith that we're all good human beings trying to figure it all out. And especially around sexuality, it's super complicated. There's not a lot of great models about how to do that. So it's like we just have this overriding faith that we trust the person's process.
Yeah.
And that they are evolving, and they will come to, and everybody's got shadows, and and everybody makes mistakes, and we just kind of, I think that's the solidity that I realize we have in our relationship. It's like, now that we've been through a bump or two, it's I have this faith, maybe we have this faith that there's room for those things. And I trust your process. It's often what we say. I trust your process, even though I don't like it right now.
Yeah, that's often that phrase when I'm like, I don't really like what's happening.
I don't agree.
I trust your process. Okay, I surrender to I can't make this happen the way I need it to. I trust that you're gonna take care of your best self.
Yeah. That's an empowering statement too. It relieves you from holding on to it and just, okay, I'm going to be over here. I trust you know what you're doing. I trust your process, man. And I love you.
And it's beautiful to have someone say that, like, Jenna, I don't
Yeah.
really agree, whatever, but I trust your process. I'm like, yay, he trusts me.
Yeah.
I trust me, and he trusts me. Okay, I'm not just gonna act for myself, because I also very much care about this. So I'm gonna hold both with incredible value. So I'm not just doing whatever I want to do. That wouldn't be me acting in the kind of integrity that I want. I also have deep care for the integrity of our connection. So that's
Yeah.
it's trusting the person's sovereignty and the sense of synergy together. Yeah.
Mm,
And one other thought that just
lovely.
kind of occurred to me, it's like at some point along the way, I can't remember where we read it or saw it or like some course, and it's like the kind of more traditional view of love is constraint at some level. If you love me, then you're not attracted to other people, you don't have sex with other people, you don't. And it's a
Yeah.
lot of sexuality. But really, love is, I set you free. Love is true
There's
love
that too.
is, and it aligns with this statement about wanting the other to be the most fully self-expressed person they can be. So that's love, right?
Yeah.
So it
Really
all
accepting that person for who they are. Really accepting them for who they are.
giving them the freedom, even if it means that this relationship is going to start to look different or something. I mean, I'm still a little afraid about that in my stomach, but so far, the act of giving my partner the freedom to be all that she can be and vice versa keeps me in. The more freedom, the more I have this desire and honor for this one,
It brings an aliveness to relation. I've been in relationships at 5 years before, and they've never felt like this. And so it brings that sense of freedom, the sense of like, oh, I get to connect what do I really want? And there's room for that in our relationship, and there's consideration for that, and there's possibility around that. That makes me feel more alive and want relationship more. So it's the opposite of like, oh no, we have to be this particular way.
Yeah, it's so counterintuitive. Okay, the video is live. I can't even see if it was, but I see there's little windows popping up to my eye here. I'm like, okay. It's so counterintuitive to the way that our generation, my generation, and other generations, some of the newer generations are shifting and changing a little bit around relationships and their outlook on sexuality, a little bit, because they are being influenced by all sorts of new things happening. But it's counterintuitive, really, with this the concept being, us coming with this concept that we have to be confined and we have to hold each other back, and there's all these rules about what you can and cannot do. And of course, sexuality, there's one way to do it in a relationship, right? I mean, everything else, your jobs and what you want to do for how you want to live your life, and maybe you want to move across the country, and maybe you want to like get new clothes, and you want to take new hobbies, all of that changes and shifts, but no, sexuality stays like this, right? And so it's yes. And so it's a difficult place to navigate, like you said, because we have created the confinement so tightly that I love your approach to the slow opening, because I find a lot of people will come to me to talk to me about it, and they're one of them is always terrified about this idea of open relationship, excited and wanting to do it, but like, oh my God, like what? There's so much. And the other one has got this massive imagination that is just, going crazy. And it is really all about taking tiny steps at a time with each other, figuring it out, shifting, creating like a clay, how does this work? Well, that doesn't really work. Well, this is I like this. Well, I don't really like that. Well, let's try this way. And every couple creates their own mold. And then that in itself is also pliable, right?
Yeah. For me, and never having actually had the experience of being non-monogamous in relationship, it was really clear. I knew that's the direction I wanted. I'd been studying Tantra. I knew sense of energy and spirituality. Like I knew that's the direction I wanted to go, but I didn't really know what it was going to be like or what would come up for me. And over time, I could start to see that places that I would start to feel immediately insecure and triggery and possessive, and all those feelings would come up. And having really, I was going to say safe, but I don't like the word safe anymore, but having predictable spaces for him and I to talk about all this stuff where he's not trying to fix me. He's not trying to he's just listening to me. And I actually went and got support myself outside our relationship by emotional support outside our relationship, so I could manage the triggers that were coming up for me. And as I sort of moved through this process and got to share my experience with him, and I did some reading and I talked to people and I did ISTA workshops, which were hugely transformative for me about starting to know my own pleasure. And I realized I could watch him across the room flirting with another woman or dancing sexy or touching another woman. If I was connected to my own pleasure, that all became possible. As soon as I was contracted and my heart closed and I let all of the fear and anxiety come up and that possessiveness come out, none of that was possible. But when I started to be dropping into my own experience, I'm like, oh, what would give me pleasure in this moment? And if I could connect to that, the world of pleasure just becomes a beautiful thing, not a thing to be frightened of.
Yeah.
So that was one of the ways that I really navigated some of that stuff for myself. Yeah.
Nice. Very nice. Wow. Okay. Well, beautiful conversation and information. What about, well, you've given a lot of really interesting wisdom to people that are possibly contemplating open the relationship or even just taking some steps to explore. I'm just wondering, if you talk about this slow movement, can you just give a little bit of guidance around what that means if somebody's taking these slow steps? What does that mean for you? How does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah, can I think an important point to make is if I've watched a lot of couples start opening up their relationship from a place of disconnection. And it's just a time bomb.
Yeah.
So, in terms of that slow opening, the first step of that is how deeply connected are you in your partnership?
It's the fundamentals. Can you communicate?
Yeah.
Can you say hard things to your partner? Does your partner have the space and capacity to hear things that might be hard to hear? So how good is your communication? Communication, that's why we start there. It's if you can't get this stuff through, if you can't navigate tricky conversations, then
I just remember one of the things that practices we were doing post the affair was we had these radical transparency conversations twice a week, once a week,
twice a week for a while. Yeah.
Tell me something you don't want me to know. Tell me an attraction you have. We went through all of our attractions. We said exactly, even if they were just little tiny things. It's just really pushing that edge of transparency.
Yeah. And that was part of the recovering from the affair about Trevor actually having a voice and me actually making room to listen. But then it was also about me claiming my own attractions and claiming my own and hearing those, So that was a really important practice. We did that for many, many months after we got through the hardest parts. Yeah.
So that was really diving into your own truths, your own truths, and being able to then reveal them to your partner.
Yeah.
I guess it was scary to do that,
but did it become after a while? I was
how did it became fun, exciting, easier?
I got more connected to the stuff that made me feel really juicy. I was on the ferry and I had these really naughty thoughts about the guy that was at the till. I was like, so I just got more connected to that part of myself, which is lovely.
Right. Yeah. You were able. Yeah.
And something we learned from one of our other coaches is that she said, so when you have these desires for other people, tell your partner the story about it as though it's like a sexy scene.
Yeah.
Let them experience the desire, the joy, the titillation you're feeling. And we found that to be very erotic, even,
Fun,
right?
yeah.
Fun, erotic, and it was like created a safe place for us to talk about our desires,
Yeah.
and these types of things. It was pretty.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Little
It's
bit-
yeah, it's like they're seeing inside your mind a little bit. So how do you perceive the scene as opposed to, oh, that look at that hot girl over there. It's like, oh, the details and what you that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Into me see.
Intimate.
Into me see, yes.
It's like the
Yeah.
more you let your partner see inside,
Mhm.
that I trust you, that's greater depth. It's like it really, that transparency has so much to do with the depth of intimacy that you share,
Mhm.
especially the dark corners, right? The things we're afraid of, the things we have maybe some shame or whatever about, just to express that.
Yeah. And that must feel really good as well, being able to release it. You know, when you can release this stuff, it frees up space. And like Jen, you were just saying, you start to feel other things and have other desires that, wow, where did that come from? Well, I released that shame. I released that fear. I released that thing I was holding on to for 20 years or whatever. And with somebody that listens to me, somebody that loves me, somebody that doesn't judge me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was another exercise we did way back, even like 2.5 years ago. Jenna came to me and she said, I want you to write down a list. We called it our sex list, of all of our desires. And she said, I don't want you to consider me at all. I just want you to like just be completely honest with yourself about what would it be like to be a fully expressed sexual being. And I think I had maybe, I don't know, a dozen items or 14 items. And it was quite a process for me just to admit to myself what I wanted, the knowing the self piece.
Yeah.
And then we took the time to reveal these things, right? And we're just talking about it. We're not doing anything. But just that talking about it was really helpful in terms of that opening, that slow opening process, right? To be able to, make the space where we could talk about what our true desires were. And then I presented that to her. And then I invited the same thing back from you.
I actually found mine the other day.
Yeah.
You found the list?
I found my sex list, that I wrote.
And did you check them all off?
I have to look at the list.
They're not all off.
I have checked some off.
I checked off maybe a third or a quarter or half, maybe.
Okay.
So it's a great way to give the direction we're going in some. And so we check back. How's the sex list going?
Yeah, I know. I like that.
Yeah, you get to learn something about each other. Oh, I had no idea that was something that would intrigue you. And
yeah. Did you find some things that were the same?
Oh yeah.
We
both like women. Let's just.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's helpful. It's like, matches. This matches.
That's easy.
So let's start with that. Let's start with that one.
Yeah, that's the thing is you start with the easy ones, right? So that's slow exposure. Start with the easy ones. Go to the taboo sex show together if that's what your edge is or whatever, or go to the store, get a flogger, like whatever it is, just like doesn't mean you have to dive into an all-out orgy with a whole bunch of people, whatever.
Still haven't really done that. There's lots of things that can happen. We actually, around that same time, we went to an event, and I don't know if they have it anymore, called West Coast Bound. And it was like a takeover of like 2.5 days of really some of the stuff with the bondage, domination, submission, that kind of stuff. And we went into like 101 workshops, and we sat in the back and was like, this is not us. And it was like, okay, cool. We know this is not what we're into. And other stuff that was just curiosities. And then we found another group that was like, oh yeah, this is really cool. We really like this. So it was really amazing to go and explore. And it was the kind of environment, and same with the taboo sex show and things like that, where you can just find where your edge is and just lean a little in. No one's expecting you to go big, or to do anything that's too scary. And it's fun to just see what's out there.
Well, that's it. That's exactly the fear is that you're going to go into these different kinds of communities and that they're all hedonists and crazy and attack you. everybody actually, the more you go in, the more you open up the doors of sexual exploration, you just find people to be warmer and more loving and more accepting, and just do whatever you want. We accept you for who you are. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful space because everybody is in that same place of exploring and wanting to discover what else gets them excited, what other kind of pleasures are available for them as singles or couples.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's a real place of sovereignty of knowing what you want and knowing what you don't want and being able to
Yeah.
say, nope, that's not for me. And I'd like a little of that.
Yeah, exactly. And there's enough for everybody.
Yeah, and the other realm that we explored quite deeply is Tantra. And so there's Tantra
Right.
festivals around, which like the online one, but you go to be in person and you get to, it's depending on what kind of festival it is, you might get to experience a puja or a transfiguration, which are these beautiful spiritual practices of energy and being in deep presence with each other. And I mean, that's all kinds of things we bring back to our lovemaking and our connection together. Yeah, that's really enriching.
Well, and there's beginners levels for everything, right?
Yeah.
There's beginners levels, and you just take the first step slowly. So I don't unfortunately see who is on. If there's any questions or anything, I see the occasional window of somebody saying, "Oh, that looks good. I like that," but for some reason I can't see it. But this has been recorded, so that's good. It's been so great to have you guys. Where can I've got your information on my Facebook page, but maybe just say where people can find out more about you.
Yeah, if people want to learn nonviolent communication, it's an amazing starting place for being able to speak your truth with compassion. I teach those online, and it's wonderful work. Heartspring.ca, I'm sure there's a link there. Trevor does counseling, therapy counseling at corequest.ca, and together we do.
But we also do conjoint therapy with couples now, which is really cool. So it's the two of us and the couple.
Yeah.
And of course, all that's online now.
Right now, yeah.
So and we're really digging that. So and that's something we do together, and I think that's through First Loving maybe that they can.
Through CoreQuest for sure.
CoreQuest.ca, and then
it's really quite remarkable to do the work as in 2-on-2. It's like the different perspectives and the way the dynamics work. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can work together, work singly and work together and create all the dynamics that exist, and beautiful.
And model the skills that we're teaching. And here's the practice. Here's how we do it. Watch it, and then they get to do it and feedback. And
And we're not perfect. We've really kind of, this has been blood, sweat, and tears. And so it's like having lived through these things, really kind of finding a way through them,
Well, it is a continual exploration for everybody, yourself, for everybody. It's a navigation, right? Yeah. And working with couples, it's a new navigation for each couple. Brand new and different for everybody. So thank you for sharing your story with us. It's been amazing. It's been amazing to see you guys. Love you guys so much. And I'll be back in Vancouver, hopefully.
That would be great. Someday.
I was going to come back in August, so hopefully end of August, but I don't know what's happening there. Or you guys will have to come here one day. So also for anybody else who's out there or watches this later on, if you have any questions or comments, please put them below and I will answer them, or I will get them to Jen and Trevor to answer them. And if so this is the Shameless Pleasure Movement, and I also have a private Facebook group where we get into a little bit more sharing with each other and releasing of shame and trauma and fear, and really getting into sharing what pleasure and love is all about. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for this opportunity, and thanks for all the work you do in the world, Leanna.
Yeah, I'm just so grateful for you doing this. It's like,
thank you. Thank you very much. Much love making. Okay, now I'm going to try to turn us off.